Hey, how you doing? This is RJ. So, last week I talked about how your quote-unquote progressive ideology is simply destructive and how it is based upon notions of absolute perfect knowledge. But in doing that video last week, I was simply laying the groundwork for what I wanted to talk about today, which is how that idea of perfect knowledge, which leads to destruction, completely obliterates the traditional idea of a hero. And what I'm going to do today is to examine the ideas that I usually talk about, a hero as a paragon of virtue, that ancient idea that's been around for about 3,000 years minimum in Western civilization, compare it with the notions that people usually talk about, the terms people usually talk about as a hero's journey, and show how progressivism is literally the opposite of both of those heroic ideals that most people are familiar with, and thus destroys really the basis of what we think of as a protagonist of a story. Thus, of course, leading to their destruction of storytelling itself. But before we get there, I just want to remind everyone that if you want a story based upon the ideas of the heroic ideal, then you might want to click on one of those links in the description or the pinned comment and go on over and take a look at some of my graphic novels. You're looking at some of the beautiful art from those graphic novels in the background, and that's exactly the core of what I focus on when creating a story. It is the traditional idea of a hero as a paragon of virtue. There are two superhero graphic novels, one returned to form for low fantasy, Crom the Destroyer, and I will be showing a very short trailer for Crom the Destroyer at the very end of this video if you want to see a little bit more about what my graphic novels are like. So if any of that appeals to you at all, click on one of those links in the description or the pinned comment and go on over and see if one of my graphic novels is for you. Anyways, back to our topic. So before I begin talking mainly about heroes, I want to note that, yes, I'm going to make some assertions about progressivism here that I'm not going to prove. Why? Because I did that last video. I'll put the link for that in the description as well if you want to go back and listen to that video I did last week. It is not necessary for you to listen to that one in order to understand what I have to say today. But again, if you want, and I'm sure someone will do this, if you want to complain in the comments that I'm not doing anything but making assumptions about progressivism and not proving what I say, well, I did that last week. But the main focus on this video is going to be describing the idea of hero and what a hero really is, and comparing and contrasting a little bit the hero's journey with the ancient idea of a hero as a paragon of virtue. So right off the bat, I'll just say that the hero's journey really is an oversimplification of the ancient ideas of a hero as a paragon of virtue. But there's a huge caveat to that, and that huge caveat usually comes along with what I talk about when I discuss the difference between ancient ideas and modern ideas. It doesn't matter which idea I talk about, whether it's the idea of logic and reason, whether it's the idea of the will, whether it's the idea of a hero. There is a massive difference between those two sets of ideas, ancient and modern. And what's the difference? Well, the difference is that the modern ideas are, at best, a pale interpretation of the old ideas, and at worst, a complete reversal of the ancient ideas. Why? Because they're all based upon a self-referential personal idea, modern ideas, that is, whereas ancient ideas are based upon, yes, a self-referential idea, but it's a self-referential idea of truth. Not to say that the truth is self-referential for me, but the truth itself references itself to prove itself. The idea of the supreme good is a whole and complete idea, which contains its own proof within itself. Whereas in modern ideas, they simply go back a number of different steps to try to obfuscate the point that you're just referencing your own self, your personal self, to try and prove your own ideas. That's it. I'm always talking about reason and logic, what the difference is between ancient logic and modern logic, which sometimes I refer to as game theory logic, and people have been saying in the comments, I think you mean something else than game theory. No, I mean game theory. Now, it's a windy, twisty road to make those connections, and I'm not doing that today, but the point is that, and yes, I realize I'm confusing the matter a little bit here because I'm talking about games in different ways, but the entire idea of modern logic is it's just a set of game principles. It's just a set of made-up principles that go back to a self-referential personal idea, usually going back to something like Descartes' I think, therefore I am. This is nothing more than a self-referential personal idea, whereas ancient logic goes back to no, the truth exists. And if you want to see the proof that the truth exists and where it proves itself, go back to metaphysics. Same with the idea of will. As I always say, a lot of people are enthralled with the Nietzschean idea of will, and so are progressives, I must say. But the Nietzschean idea of the will is just a restatement of the ancient ideas of Augustine of Hippo, and he, by the way, is the person who revamped the idea of what will is that we still use today, because the ancients, the Greeks and the Romans, had a different idea of will and how it interplayed with larger forces in the universe. But no, he redefined it according to what is true, according to the truth. Whereas within that, he says, will is for willing for the good of the truth. Whereas Nietzsche just takes all of Augustine's ideas, flips them completely over, and says, no, the good is willing for will itself. Again, a self-referential personal idea. And so, too, is it with the idea of Joseph Campbell of the hero's journey. It is a pale interpretation of those old ancient ideas of a hero as a paragon of virtue that goes back within story in Western civilization a minimum of 3,000 years. Why is it a pale interpretation? Why? Because again, he just goes back to a self-referential point. He goes back to Jungian ideas that all truth really resides within the self, within the collective self, they might say, but still, it's the self. It's just self-referential. That's why I don't use the concept of the hero's journey. Sure, it has merit, insofar as it points backwards towards that ancient idea of a paragon of virtue, but it has its flaws because, again, it does the exact same things that progressives do. Progressives say, I am the self-referential idea, my truth makes everything else true, whereas people who believe in this other kind of self-referential truth that goes back to a point, you're just obfuscating the exact same thing that progressives are doing. You're just going through a whole bunch of different steps and then saying, well, my self-referential point, personal self-referential point, is, 5, 10, 100 steps behind me through sometimes, again, modern logic. But that doesn't matter one whit. If you're doing that, you're doing the exact same thing as progressives. And progressives just have the tenacity to come out and say it blankly, not hide it through a whole bunch of different steps. The same thing is happening within both of those self-referential systems. They're saying, I personally believe this thing, therefore it is true, rather than saying, this thing is true, therefore I personally believe it. And again, most people go back to basically an idea of scientism, which is to say they believe that science is the ultimate arbiter of truth, and therefore it can prove its own principles, which it can't. Again, that's just personal self-reference being obfuscated by a number of steps before you get there. And again, I'm saying all of this because that's what the hero's journey is, as laid down by Joseph Campbell, because it's going back to basically Jungian ideas of the collective unconscious and smacks of ideas like vital eminence, which is to say, all truth resides within you. You just need to draw it out. And once you draw it out, once you get it to emanate from within you, then it becomes a life-giving principle wherein it allows you to live the good life. Whereas the ancient notion is, no, truth exists as an objective thing outside of myself. This journey that I'm going on for the hero's journey is basically an internal journey. Whereas the ancient journey, it is an external journey. Why? Because I'm looking for something else objectively that exists instead of something that exists within me, that emanates from within me. But anyway, as I've been showing you in the background, various interpretations of the hero's journey, which goes in a circle, again, it does have some merit insofar as it can point you back to those ancient ideas of a paragon of virtue. But the point for this video, and why it is a contrast to progressive ideas, is contained within it that idea that Joseph Campbell talks about and is usually represented at the bottom of this circle that you're looking at as an expansion of consciousness. And, oh, by the way, the whole thing is in a circle, visually represented as a circle, because Campbell says within his works that for him, the good life is a series of hero's journeys for yourself over and over again. But the important part is this idea that he has of the expansion of consciousness, and that is from quotes from him directly. So I'm going to go over basically my interpretation of the hero's journey. Yes, I'm sure there are many different people who have many different interpretations of it. It really doesn't matter. I'm just giving you a basic layout. The important part is that that point exists and is a clear statement by Campbell about the expansion of consciousness, which is usually represented at the low point in the circle. And when thinking specifically about that point, the hero's journey can be explained simply, I would say, as follows. First of all, you have a naive person who is existing within their own little world. They hear a call to adventure and they follow this call to adventure, which takes them out of their comfortable little world into a world of the unknown. They use all of their skills to try to overcome what they encounter within this world of the unknown, and they go through several trials. And in going through those trials, they realize, again, sometimes called the revelation point, sometimes called the expansion of their consciousness, but they realize that they have imperfect knowledge about the world, and that's why they're undergoing these trials. And again, this point, once again, we can point back to ancient references that this is an ancient idea. Augustine of Hippo, as I said, the person who really defined the idea of will that we still use today, when talking about will, said the exact thing that we all do stuff which we hope will work out well for us. And when we don't actually get a good result from what we do in order for us to make things better for ourselves, we understand that the reason for that is we've been acting according to what is essentially a lie, essentially an untruth. We believe an untruth about the world. That's why we thought it was true, and we acted on it as if it were true in order to make our station better, but it made our station worse. Therefore, something's wrong there, and it points back to we believe something untrue. The same thing, the same dynamic is playing out here within the hero's journey that Campbell talks about. So that point is a point where the hero then has a revelation. As Campbell says, has an expansion of consciousness wherein he realizes that some of the things that he believed previously, up until this point, are actually false. And so he has to follow these more perfect and better ideas, and following these better ideas allow him to more easily overcome those challenges which have been put in his way. And once he starts to overcome those challenges because of this new knowledge that he has over and over again, then he gains the treasure, the bounty. He reaches that brass ring, and then he returns to his place of origin as a triumphant hero, seasoned and wiser. And again, as Campbell notes, this should be the life of a person continuously. A life that is a good life, in his estimation, is one where a person continually goes on this circle of heroic journeys over and over again. Now again, I have to point out that this does have some inspirational qualities to it, but really, the whole thing falls apart when it goes back to the idea of vital immanence, where it goes back to the truth resides within me. All of this resides within me. I'm just bringing it out from my subconscious into my conscious so I can live it out. And the idea of the collective unconsciousness and all that, it's just a personal self-referential idea, which is the exact same thing that progressives do. So let's extract ourselves from the point which falls apart, which is a point of reference of itself which cannot prove itself, and go back to the ancient ideas where all of this comes from and the ideas of a paragon of virtue that actually make a hero. And again, I should note here at the very beginning that I'm not giving you my take on this entire thing. I'm not putting this together. This is ancient knowledge that has been around for thousands of years, that has been defined and redefined, that is to say, refined over the millennia. Yes, I'm giving you the 2-cent version of the entire thing, but again, I'm explaining something that others have explained for millennia. This is not my personal construction of the entire thing, which again plays into what I'm talking about. It's not a self-referential, personal self-referential idea. It's an idea that the truth exists, and this emanates from the truth, and people have been tugging on this string since before the time of Homer. So here's the thing. Campbell's hero's journey is subject to what you call in logic a analogical fallacy, which is to say he's taking these old ancient principle ideas and he's translating them into analogies which enter a fallacy within his actual argumentation, because analogies are never perfect representations of the ideas that they're meant to represent. But if we take this circle of the hero's journey and translate it from events of a personal nature into ideas itself, into the ideas of the virtues that, again, have been numbered and ordered in a very specific way in order to bring out the good life for millennia, then the exact same thing, the exact same pattern still holds, just in a much purer way. Now, before explaining it, I'll explain the circle very quickly. The idea of the circle of the virtues and what precedes the virtues in order to create a hero is very simple and easy within the ancient notions. First of all, you start off with right reason. Right reason is not a virtue in itself. It simply leads to the other virtues. Right reason is reason in accord with reality. Right reason leads you into the first virtue, which is prudence. Prudence is correct decision making. Prudence then will lead you to justice. Justice is rendering to every man what is their due. Justice then leads into fortitude, sometimes called courage. Fortitude being that virtue which allows you to live out the other virtues despite the slings and arrows of this world trying to tear them from you. And then fortitude leads into temperance. And temperance is not just a stabilization and equalization of all of the things within your life in order to be moderate, but it is at its height a reordering of your life according to moderation and a reordering of all of the other ideas that I've just talked about. That's why it goes in a circle, because temperance, when achieved, reorders all the ideas from right reason down through prudence, justice, fortitude, and back to temperance. It reorders them because you never actually have perfect knowledge. You can do the best you can with the knowledge you have, and you try and follow right reason as much as possible. That is to say, reason in accord with reality, but it's never perfectly ordered. So you go around this circle, around, again and again, because once you get to that point of temperance, it reorders all of the others, brings them into a closer knit circle, a more perfect circle, so that you can, again, live a good life according to well-ordered virtue. Now, several things to pull out of what I've just said. Number one, the attainment of right reason itself is preceded by that very thing which I talked about just a moment ago when I was talking about the hero's journey. The ideas of Augustine of Hippo. The idea that we all do things which we think will work out better for ourselves, make our station better in life, and when we do something and it makes it actually worse instead of better, we realize that something's not right with the information we've been working off of. We've been working off of a falsehood, a lie. Therefore, we have to bring our thoughts, our reason, more in accord with what is actually real if we wish to produce any actual results of increasing our station, our betterment in life, to attain the good life. We wish to do that, and we have to do that according to what? According to right reason. So that is how we take our personal experiences and we say, wait a second, something's not right here. I have to think in a better way. I have to think according to better ideas. If I don't, I'm just going to continue this cycle of suffering over and over again by making stupid choices which lead me to suffering. So that's what leads us into right reason. And that is a picture of what the first, well, 1/3 of the heroic journey of Campbell's is all about. And then it leads right into the first virtue of prudence, which is to make decisions based upon right reason. That's why they're good decisions. That's why it's good decision making, because you're making decisions more and more upon reason that is in accord with what is real. This then leads us into the challenge, the first challenge, the challenge of justice, which is to say, well, if this works for me, this has to work for other people, which is to say that I not only need to act in a way which is according to what is true, I also need to treat others around me in the same order of truth. And therefore, I have to render to every man what is their due. I have to treat them correctly according to what is true, according to good decision making, which is the whole notion of justice itself. And if there is any point here which corresponds to Campbell's idea of revelation, going through the virtue of justice would be that. Why? Because it's a realization of just how expansive the idea of objective truth, not personal referential truth here, but objective truth is within the world. Everyone must be treated according to what is true. And I'll get back to that in a moment, talking about how the entire thing falls apart. It becomes more clear. But let's move on for a second from justice to fortitude, because fortitude is that point, if you're comparing it with the hero's journey, that point wherein, again, you can suffer the slings and arrows of this world and still live a virtuous life. That is to say, within the hero's journey is that point where you have gained so much momentum and knowledge, revelation, that you can actually overcome what is being hurled at you as trials within this life, which again is why we often equate fortitude with courage. And then this point of Campbell's where we gain the boon, the treasure, and then bring it back to our normal everyday life, that is the virtue of temperance. That is the point wherein you say, all of these trials that I've been going through are now over. I have gotten to that virtue point of temperance wherein I moderate what is in my life and therefore can make my life better. And once again, this in a circular manner leads right back into right reason and then prudence, because temperance then reorders the other virtues and right reason itself so that you can actually live those virtues in a much more pure way. And this is needed because if you have these virtues and even the virtues themselves are not moderated according to temperance, then they themselves can become vices very easily. Prudence without reference to the other virtues can become foolhardiness. Justice without correct reference to the other virtues can simply turn into vengeance. Courage or fortitude without reference to the other virtues can turn into vainglory. And indeed, temperance without the other virtues can lead into what is essentially a destruction of the entire thing. And that's the second point that I want to pull out of this entire discussion about virtues and a paragon of virtue. It is temperance as the linchpin that connects the circle together. And why is it a linchpin? Well, more precisely, part of it is a linchpin, as defined by ancient authors. They've gone over this over and over again. Now, here's where we get into some sticky moral problems that I'm sure will probably make a couple of people turn this video off. Here's where we get to the point where certainly the medievals, and yes, even some of the ancients, talk about the destruction of the heroic ideal, the destruction of virtue itself. It is the specific point in temperance that has to do with sexual desire. Why? Because that itself definitely needs to be tempered. And it is indeed the linchpin that connects the entire circle together, which if you remove that linchpin, the entire thing will be knocked over like a series of dominoes. And here's a brief explanation about, well, I'll give you the more refined definition and explanation of it, usually given by medievals, wherein this circle of virtue either stands up or is destroyed. The point of temperance that needs to be paid attention to most notably in order to continue this circle over and over again is to be moderate as concerns your sexual desires. Why? Because if you're not, and when I say moderate, I mean the definition being that intimacy belongs to a husband and wife who have given themselves wholly and completely to each other for all of their lives. Hence the idea of till death do us part, because that idea of marriage and of self-giving is one wherein those desires are not a fulfilling of self-wants, but a self-giving of each person to each other, a complete and utter self-giving, which also includes everything that they are at this present point, everything they were in the past, and everything they will be in the future. Again, hence the till death do us part. Because if that point is not reached, wherein you can give self-giving completely and utterly, that's why there's no get out of jail free card. If you can't get to that point, then that's actually a selfish thing. If it's a selfish thing, then you're using the other person. If you're using the other person, and oh, by the way, it doesn't matter if you both agree to use each other, that's still using the other person. But if you use the other person, you're actually looking at people according to an idea that they are things rather than unique beings to be cherished and respected according to their own dignity. And if you're looking at human beings, which you are one of, according to that way of thinking, then you destroy the entire premise of right reason, because the mechanism whereby you view the world, which is to say yourself as a human being, is warped into basically a funhouse mirror where everything you see becomes warped and twisted and therefore destroys completely the idea of right reason. You can't have right reason if your interpretation of the entire world, wherein reason originally emanates from, is a warped interpretation, a warped view of the entire thing. And again, if you believe that other people can be used simply for the expansion of your pleasure, then yeah, you're looking at it through a funhouse mirror. And that destroys right reason, which then knocks over prudence, which then knocks over justice, which then knocks over fortitude, which then knocks over temperance, which then ensures that the entire circle of virtue is completely destroyed. And just as a quick aside here, isn't it funny that whenever you go and encounter someone who wants to destroy notions of truth, and this definitely includes the quote-unquote progressive people that are in control of our society today, isn't it funny that whenever you scratch at what they're trying to do and get underneath, what you usually come back to is some sort of perverted sexual desire? And that is quite simply explained by this entire thing, the entire idea of the good life, the entire idea of living virtuously, the entire idea of living according to what is true and objective truth, rather than some far off, distant, or even very close self-referential personal idea of it's true because I believe it. But anyways, I had to bring up that second point because indeed, this is stated over and over again as the linchpin for the entire idea of these virtues and why they go around in a circle, which again is why the pattern of the hero's journey is a circle. Oh, and future me here, coming back to insert something I forgot. This exact thing is also part and parcel of Campbell's heroic journey, because one of those trials is the trial of the temptation of the woman. And why this journey, again, it doesn't matter if you're talking about the hero's journey or the journey of an ancient hero or heroes according to the ancient idea, it always goes around and around in a circle, that they have to do this over and over and over again in order to reorder all of these things, in order to, as is stated by Campbell and the ancients themselves, to live a good life. And one quick third thing to pull out of this entire comparison of the two systems of heroes is that, yes, we can take those ideas of virtue, and then convert them into actual events within the person's life, not within the argument of it itself, which is what Campbell does, but within the lives of the people who actually follow this pattern of behavior. Why? Because virtues are essentially what? Well, virtues are habits within your life. You refine and gain them through habitually doing the just thing, doing the prudent thing, doing the temperate thing over and over again. And once again, that leads to a even smaller circle within this bigger circle of the ideas of how virtue gets built up within a hero, which is where personally I think Campbell makes his mistake. He takes those two circles, the smaller one that exists within the larger one, and he simply imposes the two on one circle and tries to explain it according to one circular action. That doesn't actually work. But here's the point of the entire thing. Here's the point of why this is a second video, according to that first video, which talked about progressivism and how it itself is a ideology of destruction, and why it destroys completely the idea of a hero, which then destroys really our idea of what a protagonist should be and should do, and then destroys storytelling, certainly within the modern sense. It is because within that hero's journey, again, we don't distinguish here between Campbell's hero's journey and the ancient idea of a paragon of virtue, because they have one connecting point which is essential to this entire thing. And that connecting point within that hero's journey is that revelation, is that realization that, no, I don't have perfect knowledge. I've been acting according to what is essentially a lie. I have to recorrect what I think and how I think in order to have better knowledge, in order to make my life better, in order to live the good life, in order to become, in essence, a hero. It is essential within a hero's journey, old or new, that you realize and understand that you do not have perfect knowledge. And even when you go through this entire hero's journey, you must do it again and again and again and again. It goes around in a circle. You never have perfect knowledge. You can reorder things according to more and more perfect knowledge continually over and over within your life. You can reach for perfection and always get closer and closer to it, even though you never actually grasp onto that brass ring. As I always say, it's like the graph of the horizontal axis being you in your life, and the vertical axis being infinity. You can get closer and closer within your life to that line of infinity. Every time you make a movement towards it, you are getting closer and closer to it, and you can always get closer and closer to it into infinity without actually reaching that thing. Now, hopefully, certainly within my way of thinking, you will reach that infinite point of goodness, that infinite point of truth after you die. But aside from that, the point is that this entire thing, the entire idea of a building up of a hero and a hero's journey, old or new, is based upon the idea that you have imperfect knowledge. You can never have perfect knowledge. You will continually struggle with this entire thing over and over again, trying to make yourself better over and over again. But the idea, the essential idea of progressivism is that the progressives hold within their mind the perfect idea, that their way of thinking has no flaws within it whatsoever. As I explained within the last video describing this entire thing, that this utopian idea in the future is drawing them into the future according to this perfect knowledge that they have of it. And therefore, if their policies fail, it's not because their policies were wrong in any way. No, they never, ever point the finger at themselves. No, if their policies fail, it's because someone out there, you, the other, someone other than the anointed ones of the progressives, someone has gummed up the works to make sure that their policy, their perfect policy based upon perfect knowledge, failed. And quite simply, as I'm sure you have realized by now, if you have a progressive mindset and you believe that you have perfect knowledge, which is the basis of progressivism, again, reference to my older video last week, if you want to have an in-depth discussion about that entire thing, then you can never, ever enter into a hero's journey, because a hero's journey necessitates a realization on the part of the hero, who is the protagonist, that they do not have perfect knowledge and cannot ever attain perfect knowledge. Because if you have perfect knowledge, there is absolutely zero reason for you to set off in this journey that is going to make you into a hero. Zero reason. And that's why, if you're doing things like, I don't know, reading modern comic books, watching Star Trek, Star Wars, Doctor Who, playing these quote-unquote progressive video games or tabletop games now, there's no heroism there. Why? Because, as I always say, these characters are not actual characters. They're ideas in a mask. That is to say, ideas in the mask of being a character, which they use that in order to try to get the audience to connect with these ideas on a personal level, in order to propagandize them, to sell them the idea of progressivism in a way that gets around their rational mind, which is identification through emotion. But these characters are not characters. They're ideas in a mask. And these ideas, again, since they are progressive ideas, are perfect ideas. And even if these progressive writers were to create an actual character that simply held progressive ideas within their mind, that character would still be a character who believes and is set up to be someone who has perfect ideas. So these perfect ideas, whether they exist within what is supposed to be a character or exists as that character, cannot go through trials. To go through trials and come out the other side better would be to say that those progressive ideas failed at some point, would be to say that they can be made better. But according to progressivism, they can't. They are perfect. That's why, let's say within modern comics, you get the world warping and twisting and bending in a way that destroys continuity around the character in order to validate the character, because it's a validation not only of the idea itself, but a validation of the perfection of the idea of progressivism. And as I referenced at the beginning, this is a destruction even of a protagonist, even if you don't want to call him a hero. Why? Because if you have a quote-unquote character that cannot have imperfect knowledge in any way, and there is no challenge for them, because a challenge to overcome would mean that they have imperfect knowledge that they have to overcome, then there is zero character development. Why would you develop anything when you already have something that is perfect? That makes no sense. Miss Marvel, or Rey from Star Wars, or that half Vulcan lead character in Star Trek, they're pure progressives. They are representations of an idea, or at the very least characters that have nothing but progressive ideas within their head, and their knowledge is perfect. They themselves, therefore, are perfect. This hence leads to a Mary Sue. This is why the world warps and twists and bends around them in order to validate them. This is why other characters and other things within the story must submit themselves to those characters, because they are submitting themselves then to the idea that, yes, they are the perfect idea, and therefore we must bow towards it. And yes, bowing towards that perfect idea is exactly the point. Why? Because again, these people are trying to implement their perfect idea within the world, and if their mindset is the only reason it's not working is because you're gumming up the works, then we must stop you from gumming up the works by making you kneel at the altar of progressivism. That's exactly the point. You, as the reader, just like the other characters, the side characters within the story, need to sit down, shut up, and get out of the way. Because that's the only way that these quote-unquote progressive people, who view themselves, by the way, as the hero, think that they can implement their idea in order to usher in the utopia they have always envisioned. But since we know, and since we've just gone over the idea that these people, these characters, are not heroes in any way, shape, or form, they can't even enter into the journey of a hero because of their idea of perfect knowledge. This means that the quote-unquote progressive utopia, this heroic so-called ideal that they're trying to build, is nothing more than the tyranny of villainous ideas. So, if I've given you anything new to think about, hit like, hit the shield in the lower right-hand corner of your screen to subscribe, and leave me a comment. Tell me what you think about all this. And don't forget, there are 2 links in the description for my 3 graphic novels that focus on the idea of a traditional hero who is a paragon of virtue. You're looking at some of the spectacular art from those in the background, and as I said, I'm going to play a short trailer, about 45 seconds, for one of my books, Crom the Destroyer, after I finish talking. So, if any of that appeals to you in any way, click on one of those links in the description and go on over and order yourself a copy of one of my graphic novels today. All right, I'll leave it there. I'll see you all later. Bye.
No matter how many wars you fight, no matter how much blood you shed, no matter how much rage you loose, no matter how many demons you face, no matter how many companions you lose, no matter if our kingdom falls, I know that you will return to me in honor.